All right, class, we're going to try something new. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some notes. So, y'all going to write down what these notes have, these PowerPoint notes. And then, if you can't go fast enough or you're going really fast or whatever it is, you can always pause it while it's on there. And then you can type in or write down whatever you need to write down. Okay, that way you'll still have the notes and you can use go whatever speed you need to go. All right. So it's the first time I've tried this. We'll see how it works. If it doesn't work out great, we might not do it again. Okay? But this one today is going to be on population dilemmas. All right. My son wants to stop in and say hello.
Hello.
All right. Go sit down. So, first off, we have population dilemmas. Now, this is a big issue in Europe, especially. A little bit in America, but big time in Europe. And it'll explain a lot of the problems that they're having now, but it's an issue that if they don't deal with now, it'll be a big problem going forward. Okay? So, y'all tell me what country this is? That's right. It's Europe. I hope you get it, Europe. All right. This is a beautiful little village off the coast in Italy. You can see there's not a whole lot of people there, but looks very old. Looks like something out of an old movie from a long time ago. But here's the headline. Italian mayor offers 2,000 euros to anyone willing to live in small, idyllic village in Puglia. I don't know if I said that right. Idyllic means sort of like picturesque, really beautiful. And you can see the picture. I mean, it looks like something that was built a long, long time ago. And you can see, on the left-hand side over there, you can see that there's mountains. On the right-hand side, you can see the water. It just looks really pretty. But why would they do that? Okay, I mean, look at this picture. Look at that water. It's absolutely beautiful. Okay, look at that water. You can see at the bottom there. It looks like some folks have set up an umbrella and they're just having a good old time. So why would anybody do that? Well, the reason that people would do that is if you don't have enough people in your town. Okay, if the only people that live in your town are older people and they don't make any more money because they're retired, well, that can cause problems because you're not getting any money from people who are working jobs. Okay. Now, this is a population distribution of the United States from 2016. And if you look at it, you'll see we don't really have many people at the top. Okay. The largest group of people would be people in their late 50s, early 60s. But we also have a whole lot of people, most of the people are under 60 by a pretty big margin. And what that means is we have a lot of people who are working, okay? And the way our system works is the people working will pay taxes that will help fund the people who are retired, okay? And so as long as you have a lot of people working, it's fine. But if all of a sudden, let's say everybody in the country was 100 years old and none of them were working, well, that would be a problem, okay? Now, this is about demography. Now, demography is the study of human populations, including how they change because of births, deaths, aging, and migration. Okay. Demos, remember we talked about that when we learned in civics, demos, democracy. Okay. Demos just means people. Okay. And then when graphy means you're studying something. So you're studying people and how people are distributed. Okay. And if you have a lot of people being born or a lot of people dying or most people in your country are really old or a lot of people in your country are leaving or a lot of people in your country are coming into your country, that all is something that you would study with demography. And if you look at the picture, you see there's a little nurse with a crying baby. You have an old guy who somehow, for some reason, is smiling at a grave, which, that gravestone is bigger than he is. That's pretty big. And then you have migration. There's a picture of people migrating in from Europe. Okay. Now, the next thing that's important to understand is what's called dependency ratio. Now, that's the number of old and young dependents who don't work. Okay. So my son here, he's 6. He doesn't work. All right. My mom, she is 68. She still works a little bit. Okay. But between 15 and 64, we generally say, those people are working, even though 15-year-olds don't usually work a lot, they'll work a little bit. But if you're younger than 15 or older than 64, generally we say you're not working. Okay, so if you're outside of those ranges of 15 to 64, we would call you a dependent. Okay, you have to depend on other people to take care of you. Okay, now that could be they're taken care of through taxes, or you could be taken care of just from your family. Okay, maybe you have a grandparent that lives with you, and you kind of, they have a place to stay, and you have food with you and all that good stuff. So that is an important factor to understand with a lot of these countries. Okay, if most of your people in your country are between 15 and 64, that's pretty decent. But if you have a lot of people outside of those ranges, that can be a little bit tricky. Now, generally, you're not going to have a whole lot of people outside of the ranges on both ends. Okay, you might have a whole lot of young people or a whole lot of old people, but you won't have both, because generally, if you have a bunch of young people, eventually they will become older. All right, so dependency ratio is sort of important to understand when we're talking about these population issues. Okay. Now, next is life expectancy. The average age that a person in a population is expected to live. Life expectancy in Europe for males is 79 and for females is 84. Generally, in most every place you go, men don't live as long as women because men tend to do dumb things when they're teenagers. Okay. Men are much more likely to die in war. Men are much more likely to die in the job. I mean, it's over, 90 whatever percent, upper 90% of all people who die in work-related accidents are men. They're more likely to die in car crashes, or die in they're more likely to die in a homicide or murder or something like that. So women tend to live longer. It's important to know life expectancy is measured from birth. Okay, so when you're born, so according to this, a baby that's born today would live to be 79 if they're a male or 84 for female. That doesn't mean when you turn 79 you're expected to keel over and die. Okay, that just means your life expectancy for your entire life is 79. But once you get to 79, your life expectancy actually goes up, because every day you live, your life expectancy goes up a little bit more. So if you're 35 in Europe, your life expectancy would probably be in the mid 80s. But if you're 75, your life expectancy would be closer to 90. Okay, because if you've made it through your teenage years, you've made it through middle age, nothing bad's happened, chances are you're going to live a little bit longer. Okay, and the way they get life expectancy is they just say, all right, we take all the people who lived in a certain period, and then we take when they die, and we just sort of average it out. Okay, so a lot of times if somebody's a little baby and they get sick and they die when they're really young, that will impact life expectancy. Okay, so sometimes you'll see in certain countries life expectancy is lower. There's certain countries in Africa it's really much 20 years younger than it would be in these parts of Europe. Well, that doesn't mean when you're 60 you're expected to keel over and die. Life expectancy in that situation is impacted by the fact most people that have a low life expectancy, that happens because they're dying of something when they're very young. Okay, but if you make it through childhood, okay, you make it through adolescence where you don't, because at your age you guys are more likely to do dumb things like drive too fast when you turn 16 and all that sort of thing. If you make it past that, your life expectancy will shoot up. Well, the problem is in certain countries that life expectancy doesn't go very high because people tend to die when they're younger. Okay, it's not that they suddenly keel over when they turn 60. Now, replacement rate is really important. It's the number of babies that need to be born each year so that the population continues to grow. Okay, now why do we want the population to grow? Well, we want the population to grow because if it doesn't, people will not have as many people to take care of them when they're older. Okay, so the total number of babies born each year in Europe is low, so the replacement rate is growing. So it's expected that each family must have 2.33 babies to replace the population. And that number is continuously in flux in Europe because somebody whose family has lived in Europe for generations and generations, the number of babies they will have is not that high. Okay, not very high at all. Okay, there's a lot of families, a lot of people don't get married at all, or if they do get married, they might have no kids, or maybe they only have one kid. Okay, and so a lot of people aren't having any kids at all, especially if they've been living in Europe, their families live in Europe. Now, if you have a lot of immigrants come in, they tend to have more kids, okay? So you have to kind of look at which group you're talking about. You're talking about old school Europeans, or you're talking about new immigrants. Well, new immigrants tend to have a higher birth rate. They have more people that are born, and that's because they usually come from countries where you need more kids, okay? Just like you might have heard back in the 1800s in America, a lots of people had lots of kids. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is chances are if you have 5 kids, not all 5 of them are going to make it to adulthood. There's a good chance that some of them will die before they turn 5 years old because they can get sick from something that back then they couldn't cure. And then another reason to have lots of kids is that a lot of people were farmers. That was the most common job 200 years ago, is to be a farmer. Well, if you don't have electricity, you don't have John Deere tractors and things like that, and you have to work a big farm, you need lots of people to help. And instead of trying to hire people, because most people want to have their own farm, but instead of hiring people, you could have your own kids help you out. Okay, and so what ends up happening is over time, countries become more industrialized, and they don't need as many kids. Okay, they don't need as many kids because they don't have farms anymore, so they don't need help milking cows or bringing in the corn. Okay, so the replacement rate is important because the European birth rate is pretty low. So the people that do have kids need to have more kids. Now, next is the total fertility rate. Now, that is the average number of children a woman in a given population will have in her lifetime. Okay. Now, when you say average, a lot of women in Europe don't have any kids at all. Okay. So in Europe, the total fertility rate is 1.61 children. That means the average woman will have 1.61 children. Okay. That's not very high. All right. If you looked at that number in Europe 200 years ago, that number would probably be twice as high or more because people had more kids, because they needed kids to help out. Like I explained before, farms, all that good stuff. All right. But that rate's going down. Now, the reason the population's not going way down is because people are living longer and they're having a lot of migration from parts of Africa and parts of Southwest Asia. Okay, so total fertility rates, how many kids the average woman would have in her lifetime. Now, there's a problem. There's a shrinking population in Europe right now. Okay, now what causes negative population growth? Now, look at this. This is in Italy in 2016. Okay, now if you'll look, it's similar to the same thing we saw for the United States. You'll see most of the people, though, are fairly young. Okay. Now, the problem is if you have a bunch of, if these lines are higher up and wider at the top, and it kind of looks like this kind of looks like if you look at sideways, it kind of goes from up, it goes down, then up and back down. That's sort of normal. Okay. You're obviously going to have a lot more 0 to 4 than you're going to have 100 plus. But if those numbers go up and you have more 80-year-olds and 30-year-olds, that means your population is getting too old, and that means your population is going to start shrinking because you have less young people to have more kids. And so what happens is your population slowly goes down, but since life expectancy is going up, you're having fewer babies, but the fact that the babies are there, and you're looking at how many older people there are, well, people are living longer, which makes it seem like, the population is not going down as much as it is. Okay, so you have to look at not just the fertility rate, but also life expectancy. Okay. Now, what are some reasons Italy is experiencing negative population growth? So both husband and wife need to earn money to support their family, so women put off having children. Okay, happens a lot. Women say, well, you know what? If I have a kid when I'm 25, I've just started my career. I don't want to do that. I'll wait till I get older. Well, the longer you wait to have kids, the harder it is to have kids. Okay, and then when you do, you won't have as many kids. Okay, so both women feel like they have to have a job first before they have kids, and so they push it off. Good childcare is hard to find and is very expensive. Okay, and this is kind of true everywhere. I know when I had my 2 kids in daycare, it cost more to have them in daycare than it cost for my house. So I was paying more for daycare a month than I was for my house. Okay, so that's expensive. And there's not really a good way to fix that without simply just saying, hey, we want to have more people doing that job. Okay, I know that there are some states in America, for example, that are trying to wrestle with this problem, is that childcare is very expensive. Well, how do you handle that? Well, we've talked about supply and demand. Well, if you have the supply of childcare is low and demand is high, the price is going to be high. So how do you change that? Well, you can come up with all sorts of ways. The government can just give people money that they can use to pay for childcare, but that just sort of distorts everything. The best way to do that is to increase the supply of childcare. Okay, and that's kind of hard. That's actually the opposite of what the U.S. government or states tend to do. Is they'll say, well, okay, if you want to have a childcare area, childcare, daycare, whatever, you're going to have to actually have a college degree just to work in daycare. Well, that sounds great until you realize, well, that eliminates a lot of people. I know, where I was, some of the people that watched my kids didn't have college degrees, and that's fine. You don't have to go to college to figure out how to feed a baby and burp a baby and change your diaper and take care of them and love on them and all that good stuff. So, when you put these barriers and say, okay, well, if you want to have good childcare, what we're going to do is we're going to make it really hard to become a daycare worker. Well, that ends up lowering the supply, which raises the price and causes problems. Couples have family planning methods to control the number of children they have. Not to get too much detail, but people can easily control how many kids they have, okay? And so they can say, well, I don't want to have as many kids. I might want to have one kid. Maybe I'll just have two, okay? Well, if you have two kids, well, for every family that has two kids, well, there might be some families that have no kids or one kid, which means your replacement rate gets all skewed up, okay? Now, talked about that. All right. Negative population growth can cause problems for a country because there are fewer schools and teachers, toy stores, clothing stores, all of that good stuff, okay? And so, for example, we have a whole bunch of teachers at this school. What would happen if all of a sudden we had fewer people in Hoover? Well, that could be troublesome because we have all these teachers, but there's less kids to teach, so you'd have to lay off teachers. That would necessarily be a good thing. You'd have fewer schools, okay? And that happens in some places where people move out and they don't have as many kids in a certain area. Eventually, the numbers of workers will be too small, and you have too many people who are old and retired and not enough young people to work, and that can hurt the economy, okay? Because you don't have people producing. Because if you're old and retired, you are consuming resources that other people are working for. So, for example, if you have a job and you pay Social Security tax, well, that money is taken out of your paycheck and goes to pay for somebody who's retired, okay? Well, that's money you don't have. Well, if there's 100 people working and only one person retired for every 100 people working, well, it's not that much money. Okay, but the problem America has and some of these other European countries have is that the ratio of people who are not working anymore to people who are working gets closer and closer. Okay, and imagine how hard it would be if you had to pay enough taxes to support one other person. So you would have to save or you have to work hard enough for you to have a family, but you also have to pay for some retired person, and that could be a problem. So that's one of the problems, one of the reasons it hurts the economy. And then another one, not enough men and women for the military. That could be an issue. Hopefully we won't have any major wars going on, so that's not too big of a problem. Okay, now, critical thinking. What's the best way to prevent negative population growth? I want you to rank the plans listed from strongest to weakest. Now, you don't have to write this down, okay, except the part on where it says plan and rank. Okay, you don't have to write the part on the left. All right. So provide free health care. Okay, would that help? Allow parents paid time off. Would that help? Encourage parents to have kids. Okay, or pay a birth bonus. Okay, now we kind of have that in America where you have a tax credit for having a kid. So it's kind of like if you have a kid, you get a certain amount of money from the government for having that kid. It changes from year to year. For a long time, it was $1,500. So if you had a kid, the government treated it like you paid $1,500. So of those four options, you don't have to do the next one. How would you rank those? Okay. How would you rank those? All right. And what I'm probably going to do is I'll come by when I see y'all are working on this part, and I'll just say, which one do you think? Okay. So I want to come by and check your notes to see you put 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Which one do you think would be the best? All right. Now, next part, an aging population. What causes a population to age? Well, look at Spain here. Okay. You'll see that they don't have as many kids. Okay. They've got a lot more people that are over the age of 50 than under the age of 20. Okay. So what are some reasons Spain is experiencing an aging population? Life expectancy is higher. Okay. Instead of living to be 65, people are living to be 75 or 80. Okay. So people are healthier. Okay. People don't smoke as much. People exercise more. Things that people used to have that would cause them to die when they were younger doesn't happen. So they live longer. The baby boom created a large numbers of a now aging population. Now, the baby boom, essentially what that means is after World War II, the birth rate shot up, okay? Because you had all these people die in the war, and then we look like we have peace, and the baby boomers are essentially people born after World War II, okay? So you probably have grandparents that would be considered part of the baby boom generation. So those people, there was a lot of them born, and now they're becoming retired. So if they were born in 1945, then they would be 74 right now. Okay, if they were born in 1955, they're 64. So that generation of people are not working anymore. Population aging can cause problems for a country because rising pension rates. Okay, so what that means is if, like for example, Social Security is it's not really a pension, but it sort of is. So the way it works is if you get old enough, you can start taking Social Security, and that means you get, depending on how much money you made in your lifetime, you get a certain amount of money forever. Okay, and sometimes Congress will raise the amount of money you get, or sometimes they don't change it for a while, and you're sort of at the whims of Congress. But essentially, workers working now have money taken out of their paycheck, goes to Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. spreads it out to everybody else. Okay, well, the problem is if you have a lot of people that are retired and not as many people working, that ratio gets skewed. Again, as I said before, if you have 100 workers and one person is retired, it's very easy to take care of them. Okay, but if you only have 20 workers and one person retired, well, that means those 20 workers have to pay 5 times as much money to support that one person. Okay, and as people get older and older, that number goes way down. Okay, healthcare costs. Yes, it's great that people live to be older, but that costs money. So how do they handle that? Okay, and so a large percent of healthcare costs are in the last 6 months of somebody's life. Okay, so if you're trying to keep somebody alive, or somebody's has 24-hour health care because they're sick and they're in a nursing home, that's very expensive. Okay, if you turn 65, you get a heart attack and die, your health care costs aren't that much. But if you turn 65, have a heart attack, and then they are able to save you, well, then they might have to do surgery to fix you. They might have to put a pacemaker in to make sure your heart's pumping right. They might have to check you out every now and then. You might have expensive medication, and all that costs a lot of money. And then the taxes that are paid for by the workers, well, fewer workers, less taxes. Okay, again, causes a problem. It's one of the reasons in Europe they're bringing in a lot of younger immigrants, because those people can have jobs and pay taxes, and then that will support the older people. Okay, now what's the best way to cope with an aging population? Require people to save. Pension bonus to work longer. So if you, instead of retiring at 62, if you wait to retire to you are 72, you get a little more money if you do that. Okay, you wait an extra 10 years. Pay relatives to provide care. Okay, you say, well, we want older people to be taken care of by their relatives instead of strangers or healthcare or whatever. Or do you encourage companies to pay? Which one of those do you think would be the best way to cope with an aging population? Okay. Now, what causes the size of a workforce to decline? Now, here's Germany. Okay. You can see they've got a lot of people in the 50s and 60s. Now, what are some reasons Germany's experiencing a declining workforce? More workers retire each year than join the workforce. So every year, they have more people that are retiring, they're not working anymore, than are coming into the workforce. And then again, baby boomers. The dependency ratio is changing in Germany. For example, in 2000, 100 German workers supported 81 dependents. Okay? In 2030, it's suggested that 100 German workers will have to support 121 dependents. Okay? And that the problem is those aren't just younger dependents because they're not having lots of kids. A lot of that are older dependents because you're only going to, like my son, I'll only have to support him for another 10 or 12 years. Okay. And, in less than 10 years, he can get a job making a little bit of money himself. But when you have older people, if someone retires at 65, well, that means they might live for another 20 or 25 years. Well, that means you're going to have to support them for 20 or 25 years. And as medicine gets better and on, you have way more people getting retired and a lot less workers working to support them. And so that's a problem. Okay, so you either have to raise taxes way up, or you have to limit the benefits, and it's just not good. And a lot of countries are just ignoring this problem until it gets really bad. A declining workforce can cause problems for a country. There'll be a decline of skilled workers. Okay, workers that have specific skills, like a plumber. Okay, like I can't just go be a plumber. That takes a lot of practice to be good at. It could cause the economy to suffer, and workers will have to pay higher taxes to support the dependency ratio. So, like we just said with Germany, instead of one person essentially helping to support 0.8 people, they're going to have to support 1.2 people. So that means that either the people they're supporting have to get less money from them, or they're going to have to get more money. Well, if they get more money from them, that means they have to pay more in taxes. So they're going to work just as much as they've always worked, but the government's going to take more money from them to give to the older people. And then what happens? Well, they're not any better off, but the older people are, and that's not good for the economy either. Okay, so you either pay higher taxes or older people get less benefits. Not really good options. Okay. So what do you think the best way to cope with the declining workforce? Get workers from other countries, give mothers flexible schedules, require workers to work longer, not like a day. It means instead of retiring, when they turn 65, you can say you can't retire until you're 70. Okay, that would have a big impact. I know in Alabama for a long time, teachers only had to work for 25 years before they could retire. And so you had people that were teachers that could retire and get money from the state of Alabama, and they weren't even 50 years old. My wife, for example, she's been teaching for almost 15 years. She's going to be able to retire from her job when she's like 48, okay, which her life expectancy at 48 is like 88. So that means she'd work for 25 years and be retired for 40 years, and the math doesn't work out. You can't be retired longer than you work, okay? Otherwise, the money is where's it going to come from? Another one would be move factories to other countries. All right, so I want you to put down which one of those you think is best, and I'll come around and I'll check, see how you're doing. All right, now look, developing world and developed. Now, if you look, developed would be, we would think of as richer countries, okay? So you've got United States, Canada, most of Europe, Australia, Korea, or should be South Korea on there. You've also got Japan, South Africa. And so if you look on the bottom left, okay, do you see it looks kind of like a pyramid? Well, in the developed countries, it's pretty straight, okay? But if you look at the developing countries, you can see it's kind of the same way as the other ones were. There's a lot more young people and not many old people. So there's way more young people. Now, if you look at 2025, which is 6 years away, you'll notice that there's way more older people than there were, okay? Instead of it looking like on the left like a Christmas tree, okay, on the right, it's almost more like a rectangle, okay? It kind of tapers off at the top, but there's a lot more older workers, okay? And that can cause problems, okay? Here's another one. Here's India, okay? If you look at India's population between male and female, you'll notice they have a lot more males than females, and that's a whole nother issue, okay? There's Nigeria. Okay, do you see the difference? Okay, let me go back and let you see it, okay? Do you see how it kind of slowly tapers? But here it really gets thin, okay? So there's a lot more younger workers to support the older people. So Nigeria is in fine shape now, but as life expectancy gets older, or gets higher, sorry, my son's trying to talk to me. As life expectancy goes up in Nigeria, those numbers will get higher at the top, and they'll probably have the same issues. So you have to handle that stuff early on. Okay, China, same thing. Okay, you'll notice China, there's a couple of places where it gets really high. All right, You can see they have more males than females. Well, why is that? Well, for a long time in China, you could only have one kid. And for a lot of people, they said, well, if we only have one kid, it needs to be a boy. And so there's, depending on how old you are, you might have way more males than females, and that's not good. All right. Here's some photographs. You see top left, there's some old people fanning themselves. Top right looks like a graduation. Bottom left, military folks. Bottom right, some kids playing. So each of these pictures sort of represents the different stages and different things that happen when you have life, and why it's important to pay attention to what you're doing.